Welcome to the panel Zoom discussion called New Game in the Post-COVID Balkans, Navigating Between Vaccine Politics, Transatlantic Hopes and European Aspirations. In the first part of the title, we have this phrase, New Game in the Post-COVID Balkans, looking at the development of the situation right now in the region, from Serbia to Montenegro, from North Macedonia, Kosovo, to Bosnia and Herzegovina and Sarajevo. The numbers are skyrocketing, numbers of COVID-19 infections, and parts of the region are on the brink of the catastrophe, health catastrophe. That means we are still in the COVID Balkans, that's for sure, but this is something that we will explore in the panel as we go on. We have, it's obvious that we have the most wonderful panel right now, and this will be a very interesting discussion. I will just shortly introduce my panelists, say one or two words as an introduction, just to get the discussion flowing and kick it off. We will have short inputs on the panel and probably a few additional questions among the panelists, and then I will be following the chat function on the Zoom, and we'll try to bring in your questions into the debate. So if you have any questions as you listen to our colleagues on the panel, just place them in the chat, and I will be following the chat and try to bring the questions in the Q&A. So today we have five wonderful experts on the Balkans and much more. I will start with Engjellushe Morina, coming to us from Berlin, if I'm not mistaken right now. Engjellushe is Senior Policy Fellow with the wider Europe program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. So welcome from lockdown in Vienna, part lockdown to part lockdown in Berlin. Jovana Marović is, I believe, right now in Podgorica, aren't you, Jovana? You are not. Where are you hiding?
I'm in Kotor.
Ah, Kotor. I mean, that's much nicer than Podgorica. Lucky you. So Jovana is Executive Director of the Politikon network in Podgorica, and she's also a member of the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group, which leads me to Florian Bieber, joining us from Graz. I think I'm right. You are not on Hvar or somewhere in Croatia. That's only in summer. Florian is professor in Southeast European Studies at the Center for Southeast European Studies of the University of Graz. There are so many Southeast European in the title, but that's life. And he is at the same time coordinator of Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group. And I'm also happy to be part of that policy advisory group. Then on my left upper part of the Zoom, I have Vuk Vuksanovic joining us from Belgrade, where just the new lockdown was announced for the next at least 5 to 7 days. And Vuk will tell us a bit at the beginning how the situation in Belgrade is unfolding right now. Vuk is researcher at the Belgrade Center for Security Policy and at the same time associated of LSE Ideas. And last but not least, my dear colleague Faruk Ajeti. He is researcher at the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, where I also sit and do my research. This whole event is supported or organized, co-organized with the Austrian Marshall Plan Foundation, with the Ministry of Defense of Austria, which still has a huge presence in the Balkans, and in partnership with the European Council on Foreign Relations. So much for the introduction, and let us jump into today's story. And I would just start with a metaphor, with a short one. So imagine, or with a question, imagine an extraterrestrial life from Mars. I mean, Mars was recently in the last few weeks very much in the debate. Imagine these small Martians landing on Earth today in March 2021 and accidentally landing somewhere in the Balkans. It can be Sarajevo, Konjic, Podgorica, Kotor. I mean, Kotor would be too nice. I mean, Belgrade. And then the question will be, I mean, what will the small Martians see and how will they react? I mean, and obviously there are different perceptions. Even the Martians have different perceptions on the reality, but they will probably see parts of the region collapsing under skyrocketing numbers of COVID infections, which like Bosnia, Serbia, North Macedonia, Albania. They will see interesting presidents claiming that they are first in Europe in this or that. They will see a lot of tabloids. They will see the European Union, or partly not see the European Union acting on the grounds. They will hear rumors that there are new transatlantic hopes, and the new President Biden, I mean, who is not sitting obviously from the Martian perspective of viewing the Balkans, but somewhere else. They will hear rumors about this one. They will hear that there is a process of European integration and that there is something like democracy. But I think, I mean, they will be pretty much confused with the situation on the ground. So now that's my starting point, and I will ask Florian first to bring some light into this confusion that we have into the so-called COVID or post-COVID Balkans. And as I said, looking at the numbers, it's definitely COVID. So Florian, what will be your take? I mean, how would you describe the current situation in the region, and would you find any kind of a message, a positive message that Martians could take back to Mars?
Well, thanks, Vedran. I'm very glad to see that most of the attendees are not Martians, so I don't have to begin with basics about the region. And it's extremely hard I would have a hard time to explain Martians what's going on. I have a hard time explaining it to people like the audience and all of you what is happening, because I think we're after 1 year. I mean, I haven't been to the region for a year. We all lose touch with what is reality, actually. I mean, is it just us talking to each other on Zoom? So you kind of wonder. But I mean, I think one thing, I was being a good lockdown person in the first part of the whole thing a year ago, where we have the anniversary, and read Camus, and I read Laura Spiney's Pale Rider to get myself ready. And I think they probably prepared me better for everything than any news articles I've been following. The one told me about the second wave, and so I was ready for that. And the other one told me, when I reading Camus, is that the end is harder than the beginning. And it sounds kind of paradoxically, but we're now in a position where, you know, it's no longer uncertain that this pandemic will end, but the end is still painfully long, and actually, in terms of human lives lost, even more difficult. And of course, I mean, in a very different metaphor, I was always imagining the last concentration camp victim killed on the day before liberation. I mean, it's this, the proximity of the end makes the suffering worse in many ways. And I think this is where we're in, hopefully right now, in the sense, not in the sense of hopeful for the suffering, but hopeful that the end is indeed around the corner. But still, it takes longer than we hope, and it takes longer than we expect. And I think human psychology works that we could all tolerate a lot of restrictions and anxiety a year ago, and that tolerance has decreased. And also this is reflected in public policy and the difficulty to impose restrictions on citizens at this moment, which, you know, considering the numbers, would seem a lot more useful now than it would have been a year ago, considering the way things are across Europe. And we're also, of course, in difficult position, because assessing what is going on is something which is, you know, has this pandemic really changed anything, or is it just opening our eyes to something which has been there all along, and it's just been kind of pulling the curtains away from problems where we could ignore before. And again, we don't, you know, I don't claim to really be able to answer all of that, but I think, of course, the brittleness of public health and public administration is something which we see fully revealed in many countries of the Western Balkans. The first wave was a way where one could see that it triggered a harsh lockdown, which delivered with all the problems it had. And I think we all know the way in which it was even excessively rigid in many ways, the restrictions. And I think, first of all, it was more a sprint than a marathon, and that the fighting a pandemic always required a marathon response, and it didn't induce patience and endurance, but rather said, we do this for 2 weeks and then we're done with it, basically, which has also been always the message. And I mean, this is not the Western Balkans only. In Austria, we've been also getting messages, we just have to face this hard weeks and then we'll be fine. But the message, of course, is that at some point people lose the ability to wait for another 2 weeks after the 10th 2 weeks and the 20th and the 30th. And that's, I think, the difficulty. But what has this revealed? I mean, I think this is maybe, I think it revealed that the ability of states and also the care of political leadership is very limited. I mean, for their citizens and their willingness to see the suffering happen and to engage in irresponsible behavior is quite widespread. And I think this will translate into civic disappointment with politics down the road. The other one is, I think, that EU enlargement, I think, is effectively dead. And it sounds maybe harsh, and EU officials will say, well, there's a process and there's discussions, but I think that the underlying narrative has completely collapsed in the last year. And I say this with great pain because I don't see this as a positive thing, but countries which were hoping to start talks have been blocked for frivolous reasons. There's been no dynamic to undo this process, but I think even more the credibility with the absence of vaccines from the European Union in the region and the absence, I mean, there was the kind of compensation after the first wave of some assistance which was provided in the management of the problems after the first wave. But now, when really the situation is much worse, and the only provider of vaccines are donations by President Vučić, who is redonating vaccines he's been getting from China and Russia, sends a disastrous picture. And I think recovering from that image, and it's not just an image, it's a policy failure of the European Union, and it makes basically the kind of the gesture of seeing President Vučić giving the government of North Macedonia vaccines when it has been kind of signaling that it's looking for the EU as the partner is, I think, kind of sending the message that you're a fool if you're relying on the European Union, and you're wise if you rely on other actors who might have their own agenda, but they're delivering. And I think getting out of that and getting out of, it's not just about the death of EU enlargement as a narrative you can really convince people. It's also about the message that cynicism and kind of being a streetwise gangster style politician prevails over somebody who has some kind of idealism is, I think, really a dangerous message. And again, I mean, nothing is irreparable, but I feel like the damage done is because it is in a moment of great attention and anxiety is I think, fundamentally important. I don't think that the other actors who have been using this deliberately, and I think we have to be very clear, and I've said it often, that the involvement of Russia and China in providing vaccines has been a deliberate attempt to undermine the European Union. The way it has not been registering, they've been not registering them initially with the European medical authorities, not trying to get approval. It's deliberately used as a way to undermine the European Union. But then you have to be wiser than that. If you are the so-called geopolitical commission, which it claims to be, then you have to act geopolitically and undermine those attempts to subvert you. But in fact, the European Union's actions has been doing everything to confirm this external actor's intervention to be correct. And I think this coupled with the passivity on other issues, lack of clarity on full clarity on authoritarian tendencies, the lack of kind of movement on issues which are about enlargement, dialogue, all of this is just kind of piecemeal and ad hoc, but nothing structural and strategic. And I think that picture together is, I think, leaves not just the EU, but leaves the enlargement, but the idea of a transformation in shambles in the region. I think this is going to be probably one of the, besides the human cost and the destruction of trust in public administration, one of the great costs of this pandemic. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, I don't know whether I should thank you, Florian, or not. I mean, for this very sober assessment. I mean, EU enlargement is effectively dead, cynicism, streetwise, gangster style of politics, geopolitical commission, not being geopolitical and commission at all. This is a very, very sober picture. And if the Martians would come for some hope, listening to you, Florian, there would be none. But always as when you believe there is no hope, there is still something around the corner, and I believe we will discover something, at least a bit of hope during the discussion. But thanks a lot for this initial broader picture and assessment. Let's try to go and take a few points that Florian make and develop it further and look into specifics of vaccine politics and in some parts of the region. I would like now to jump from Graz to Berlin to Engjellushe. Engjellushe, what will be your take on COVID, post-COVID Balkans and the games? Endless games that are being played right now, not for the sake of the region.
Thanks a lot, Vedran, for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here talking to you and with you about this very topical issue that I think it's going to stay with us for quite some time. I totally agree with the assessment. It is bleak, and with the assessment of Florian, it is rather bleak. It has become more bleak as the time goes by, because we were all hoping that this would go away and would not last. At least I was personally hoping and thinking, assuming that this is not going to go on for such a long time. And the tolerance has indeed run thin. At the beginning, the tolerance was thin here in Berlin with colleagues who had kids. And now everyone is just fed up. Everyone is fed up with many things. But yes, this has, of course, played out more depressingly in the Balkans rather than in some European countries. I think in many ways, us who are not sitting there right now are a little bit in a different position. I speak to family and friends often, and the situation is gone worse than it was a year ago at the beginning of the pandemic. And what I realized in Kosovo recently, especially, people have taken things in their own hands. So now I see a lot of calls for plasma blood, they call it. So they don't, they have realized now that they really have to look after themselves, because after a year, it's pretty obvious that in these countries with such a weak public health administration and also very weak institutions in many ways, that a lot of these things have been there. All these weaknesses in administration, in different institutions, in different political doings have been there, but they have been kind of brought into the surface so rapidly by the pandemics, and in some cases even deteriorated. So I mean, I'm not so sure when is this going to go away, because what I see here and I take the example of Germany. At the beginning, there were a lot of praising going on that Germany is handling it really well, and so on and so forth. But now, and the ratings have been going quite high for some of the leaders, especially the chancellor. But if you look at it today, if you look at the headlines today, it's like really, it's depressing, and it doesn't give any sign of any positivity that things will come better anytime soon, and that this and the signs of some kind of positive developments will appear anytime soon. Now, this is in Germany. Now, imagine where the signs of positivity will be in the Balkans. I mean, it's quite disheartening that that whatever we propose today and in other forums that we have a chance to speak, I feel that it's not going to turn out to be that positive in a short period of time. So I'm just hoping that first of all, that post-pandemic period will arrive sooner than we think, and then in the post-pandemic period we can start seeing some of the there has been some signs in some of the Balkan countries, that the one that I mentioned, that people have decided that they need to take things in their own hand. And when I talk about this, I talk more about more input coming from civil society, and more pressure even coming from different groups towards the strengthening of the institutions, more pressure coming to the EU. And there has been a lot of pressure, of course, coming towards the EU since the beginning, because they have just been unable to help the region, despite the rhetoric that we have seen. So I think, yeah, I'm sorry to finish finish this first intervention in a, like Florian, in a bit of a depressing note, but yeah, I think it's too early to tell what the post-pandemic is going to reveal.
Yes. Engjellushe, just a quick follow-up question. I mean, you said that's quite important. People have decided to take it into their hands. I mean, that means, I mean, trying to get some oxygen on the private market for the loved ones at home, just to provide some treatment, or going for medication. But it also can be a kind of a first political step towards a kind of an awakening of the citizens in a way. So do you would you go so far and say that the pandemic could initiate a kind of a new sense of urgency and awareness of the citizens, that a lot has to be changed, and that there are elites and structures to be blamed, and that there is a need for someone to take responsibility? So can you at least from your point of view, I mean, and in the last few years we have seen a lot of local initiatives popping up, arguing for fresh air, against corruption, et cetera, et cetera. So do you see any kind of a nucleus of some kind of a new beginning on the very far post-COVID horizon? Just a few sentences.
Again, with a caveat, but when I talked about the people taking things in their own hands, I kind of also linked it with what has happened recently in Kosovo and what has, in a way, happened in other regional countries. So we have seen a little bit of disobedience here and there. But in Kosovo, I think people were so frustrated because of this combination, the pandemics and the political crisis, the perpetual political crisis, that I was quite amazed to see such an organization of people like sort of gathering together and ending up in one camp, so to speak. And we have seen this huge result for one political party that is offering to fight the corruption, to tackle all these issues that people are struggling with on daily basis nowadays. So I think I see that as people taking things in their own hands in a way, the election result, the recent election results. And I also see a bit of this going on in Albania, the pre-election Albania. There is quite a bit of talk of not only the usual political campaigns that we have seen, but now there are elements of the social justice elements, doing something about health administration. These were always pre-campaign issues, but they were never taken seriously after the campaigns, after the election result was announced. So I think, yes, there could be a possibility of such a high level of frustration translating into, hopefully, people taking things more into their hands.
Thank you so much. I believe we will pick it up again. I'm quite sure during the debate. So let's take the flight from. I mean, there are no flights to Kotor right now from Berlin, but after Florian's and Engjellushe's rather sober and to a certain extent depressing assessment of the current situation, let's go to Kotor and to Montenegro, to Jovana Marović, to see. I mean, I hope at least to have something positive. The weather is much nicer in Kotor than it is in Vienna today, so that's fine, but that's not enough. So Jovana, what's your take? I mean, not only from the perspective of Montenegro, but from a general perspective, and as you deal a lot also with the rule of law issue, it will be interesting to know. I mean, following up on Florian's EU enlargement is effectively a dead statement. Whether there is any place for maneuver in terms of next steps towards in this enlargement process. So Jovana, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you, Vedran. It always seems that the situation in Montenegro is better than in the rest of the Western Balkans, because it was the front runner of the it still is a front runner of the European integration process. Montenegro managed to change the non-democratic government during the last year, and somehow everyone is expecting that there are some developments in the country. but Montenegro is always sharing the same issues and same problems as the rest of the region. At the moment, the situation regarding the coronavirus crisis is extremely complicated. Of course, the Montenegro is sharing the same fate as the rest of the Western Balkans when it comes to European integration process, even though the things are moving in the country when it comes to democratization and everything. As I said, the government was changed and the new government was elected in December, but somehow there is no clear agenda when it comes to the fight against corruption and organized crime. There is a lack of PR strategy. There are many other issues which are preventing the real democratization in the country. But the most important thing that the judiciary is not independent, and somehow the rule of law, there are lots of obstacles in order to strengthen the rule of law. But the positive thing I also have to highlight that there is awareness among citizens that they can influence the change and that they can actually change the government through elections. There is a recent public opinion survey by BiEPAG, which actually shows that 80% of citizens in Montenegro believe in the change through elections. And somehow there is always high turnout in Montenegro when it comes to national or local elections. For example, during the last August, 76% of citizens actually went to the polls. And 2 days ago, we had the local elections in second largest municipality in Montenegro. More than 80% of citizens voted actually there. So it's really surprising during the coronavirus crisis and everything, but somehow the whole situation in the country is really complicated with the polarization, with lots of identity issues and everything. So people, that's also their dissatisfaction with the situation in the country, with the same government, which actually was there for 30 years. And as it was already highlighted, you know, people want to have influence on changes. They want some new faces and some new programs which are based on fight against corruption and organized crime, how to improve situation and how to provide like rights to the citizens and their like freedoms. But there are many other more important, let's say, issues in Montenegro. For example, there will be huge economic issues by the end of the year because of the highway project, because of the World Bank's estimation that we will have the public debt around 98% by the end of the year. It will be really complicated to cope with these issues during the coronavirus crisis. So Montenegro will have lots of to worry about in post-pandemic world. And during this pandemic COVID-19 world, what is happening now in the country, we received vaccines from Serbia. There was spectacle about 2,000 vaccines from Serbia. We also received a donation from China, which was 30,000, but it wasn't like presented in the same way. But somehow there is feeling in the country that the EU is not helping with vaccines, that the EU is not there, and that somehow it's not the official position of the government. It's something which is, you know, dissatisfaction among citizens, and the whole situation is not going in right directions when it comes to vaccines and the coronavirus crisis management. As I said, we had elections 2 days ago, and somehow there is influence that politics has the influence over the management of the coronavirus crisis in Montenegro, because until 7 days ago, it was people were allowed to enter the country without PCR tests, and this was connected with the local elections and with the somehow support from Serbia to some local actors. So there are some developments in the country, but somehow, you know, there will be no developments in the European Union's agenda on enlargement process, which is really something which is not encouraging for the reforms in Montenegro and in the rest of the Western Balkans. Montenegro accepted the new methodology, but it's still waiting for the guidelines from the European Commission. So I guess that there are two obstacles on the European path of Montenegro. The first one is that we are not delivering within the chapters 23 and 24 when it comes to the rule of law, and the second one is that the European Union does not have the clear strategy what to do with Montenegro and Serbia, which are currently negotiating on the EU accession on membership in the EU. And finally, I already highlighted this issue about Chinese influence, and the Russia's influence is currently in the background because we are done with the law on freedom of religion, which was one of the main topics where Russia had influence during the last year. But the Chinese influence is growing in the country. China was at the first place during the last year when it comes to foreign direct investments, and those information about investments is not public. The second thing is about the public debt and how this whole situation with the highway will develop. And also there are announcements that China will be more present in the country with some new investments and everything. So I guess that China is here to stay for some time, and China is only influencing, poor state of the rule of law of the country. So if there is more influence from China, the country is actually moving far away from the European integration process and from the European Union. So there are lots of challenges when it comes to Montenegro, but as I said, we are sharing the same problems and issues as the rest of the region. So I guess that the same apply to Serbia and the rest of the region. So that's it for now. I'm here for the question.
Thank you so much, Jovana. Just a quick question. I mean, Montenegro got a new government and got rid of the holy Đukanović. And I mean, he's still sitting in the presidency. But just a quick question. So if you would need to grade the performance of the Montenegrin government now, a few months after the government started its work, on a scale between 1 and 10, why would you not give it the best possible grade? Because I know that you would probably not. And which grade would it be? Just quickly.
I don't know. It's
not going to be a 10.
No, it's somewhere between 7, maybe 7, I guess. I mean, there is no clear strategy. There is no fine line between populism and what is actually happening on the ground. There are lots of things which are connected with the government. For example, they are not following the measures when it comes to the coronavirus crisis and to combat coronavirus crisis, even from the prime minister's levels. So there is whole confusion in the new government. There is lack of coordination between the line ministers. There are lots of announcements when it comes to fight against corruption and organized crime, but there are no real results or something which is happening within the European negotiation process within the European Union. They are just calculating that Montenegro will be the next member of the EU, but without concrete steps how to fulfill interim benchmarks or how to adapt the new methodology with the new situation. So because of depolarization and because of the growing nationalism, because of unstable support in the parliament for the new government, because of all these reasons which I already mentioned, I don't see that the situation will be better in the next and coming period. So for the first 100 days of government, the grade is 7.
Yeah, I mean 7 is still quite good.
It's okay. Yes.
Okay. So let's go to Belgrade, to Vuk Vuksanovic. Vuk, Florian just mentioned the streetwise gangster style, and he was probably referring to your president, the president of Serbia. Can you, I mean, that would be the question. I mean, Belgrade in Serbia is now on the hotspot of these geopolitical vaccine games, and Vučić is playing his games. There is a obvious, even further rise of authoritarian tactics and policies in Serbia right now, and China and Russia play a big role in that one. So could you, for us and for the participants, just try to give us a kind of a bigger overall picture, what's going on from the perspective of Belgrade?
Thanks, Vedran. And I mean, that is precisely the angle on which I wanted to focus. I wanted to talk about Chinese and Russian vaccine diplomacy in the Balkans. And as a result, I would talk quite a lot about Serbia, given that it is always a country in the Balkans, which, for better or worse, is always in the heart of things. So, and then these two issues particularly reflect upon Serbia. Now, I would necessarily start with China, given that China has been in the headlines. I mean, I would say that for the Beijing policymakers, both Serbia and the Balkans have become just another theater to exercise a policy which has now popularly been known as vaccine diplomacy. And this vaccine diplomacy is a continuation of another policy that we have witnessed last year, which we also popularly called mask diplomacy. Last year, of course, China attempted to repair its global reputation, damaged global reputation because of the outbreak which originated in Wuhan, by asserting itself as a reliable donor and reliable supplier of medical equipment. But now we have a same set of premises, but now only applied to the vaccines. I mean, so this is a way for China to repair its reputation, but also to build up its political influence in individual countries and to boost its soft power capital. And indeed, we have seen that Chinese vaccines can be found anywhere where the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative has taken root. So Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, Africa, and now the Balkans. And however, I want to see that Serbia and the Balkans are particularly attractive for China on this front, because China wants to compete with Western and Russian manufacturers of vaccines. She's interested in its share of the market. So the basic premise of China is that if their vaccine market strategy is effective in countries which are either EU membership candidates or EU member states, that can be replicated in other EU markets. So, and I mean, I think that we have seen that this Chinese campaign has been successful in a sense, because it's not just Serbia. Now it's also non-EU member states in Southeastern Europe, like Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is thinking very hardly about getting Chinese vaccines, and Turkey, which is getting them. But we also have EU member states now, Hungary, of course, with Viktor Orban, who shares many traits with Alexander Vučić. But now we also have Croatia. I mean, President Milanović of Croatia said that if necessary, he would buy vaccines even from Chechen mafia, if that is necessary. And Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz is also contemplating very hard on getting his hands on the Chinese vaccines. And of course, even Thierry Breton, who is EU's internal market commissioner, also said that if some countries want to purchase Russian Sputnik 5 vaccines, or China Sinopharm vaccines, it's fine. So, I mean, there is evidently a lot of locomotion in the EU on this issue as well. And I also think that we have two big implications of this is, I mean, something which Florian has mentioned, which is now that Serbia is also practicing its own form of vaccine diplomacy by donating some small surpluses to some of its neighbors. So it is a good way to assert leadership for Alexander Vučić and to portray yourself to the Europeans in a different light. But I also think that the bigger game changer is something that he has announced, the possibility that Serbia, with the help of the capital from the Emirates and China, might open a Sinopharm factory on Serbian soil. That would be a bigger game changer, in my opinion, because if this crisis carries on, Serbia could become a regional supply center for Southeastern Europe and potentially even for wider markets when it comes to Chinese vaccines. And now, as far as the calculations which guide Serbia in this particular transaction, I think it's number one, that old principle: beggars can be choosers. Serbia was hit hard. I mean, with the pandemic, the mortality rate is not necessarily that high as in some other countries, but of course, mortality rate among medical workers is high. And of course, the always unknown economic fallout and psychological anxieties are also high among the population. So that's number one. But I also think that this vaccine procurement is also a neat way for the Serbian leadership to exercise the old patterns of its foreign policy. Number one, diversify partnerships. So for them, getting vaccines fits in under the old principle: don't put all your eggs in a single basket. And I think number two, it is also a way to balance and pit the West and non-Western players against each other to see from whom you can score a better bargain. I mean, I think we all remember though that speech from last year when EU introduced in what I think was a short-sighted decision at that moment in time to ban export of protective medical devices outside the EU. Vučić responded with his famous statement that European solidarity is a fairy tale and that China is the only country that can help us. So this is the same behavior as the one we have seen before. If you do want to help us out, China will. And if you want to repair your reputation, well, come to me with a better offer. And of course, China is also useful as a tool of domestic political marketing for Alexander Vučić and entourage around him. By portraying yourself as the one who is enabling the influx of Chinese capital or the arrival of Chinese vaccines, you score domestically with your own electorate. And I also want to now touch briefly on Russian vaccines as well. I think that, yes, there is an element of Russian vaccines getting this soft power, buying political influence is present when it comes to the Russian vaccines. But amusingly enough, for now, it appears that the Russian logic on the vaccine front is much more market-driven than anything else. I mean, we have seen a statement by Vladimir Putin who says that Russia has to win its share of $100 billion global vaccine market. So Russian policymakers appear to be treating this as a fight for the share of the global market. And I can't confirm how true this is, but Putin has talked that the Russian intelligence service believe that information war will be waged against Russian vaccines, and some countries which are from Southeastern Europe has been cited. Hungary, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, for instance. So it does speak that they are treating this as a fight to win its share of the pie. And of course, we also have now stories that Serbia will also open up production facilities for Sputnik 5, but not just Serbia, more importantly, a more prosperous EU member state, which is Italy. And Sputnik 5 is already now world's second vaccine after Pfizer in terms of global demand. But I also think that this tells us something about the nature of Serbo-Russian partnership right now, because some of you might remember that last year, Russia also sent aid to Serbia, which was quite generous. To Italy, Russia sent 16 military airplanes of medical aid, while to Serbia, a much smaller country, it sent 11. However, the Russian aid was not greeted enthusiastically the way the Chinese aid was. Well, why? I think that number one, this spoke about a very big crisis in the relationship between the two, because Russians were very displeased about Belgrade's pivot towards Washington during Trump's era and the attempt that they were trying to resolve the Kosovo dispute without Russian involvement. So now when we have Biden in the White House, there is a slight imperative for Vučić to repivot, to do slight repivot towards Moscow. And this is the reason why the second batch of the Sputnik 5 vaccine was greeted by Alexander Vučić, while the first one was not. So the acquisition of Russian vaccine is about three things. First, it's about a way of diplomatically courting Moscow to show, look, we still haven't severed ties with you guys. It's number two, to use vaccines as a leverage with the West, either in terms of vaccine procurement or on general political issues like the Kosovo dispute. And the third one is generating a good domestic PR. So in a sense, Russia is still a factor, but not as a potent factor as it once was, and it's certainly not as potent as China is. And I still think that Vučić still fears that Russia might sell him out in some hypothetical great power bargain with the US. And this is the part where I want to conclude on this, because I'm not quite sure whether I have breached my timetable so far. I think that the biggest loser of both Chinese and Russian vaccine diplomacy in Serbia and potentially in the Balkans is the European Union itself. I think that this vaccine procurement has shown the old strategic realities that Russia and China will always fill whatever opening they have left as a result of EU's slow strategic reflexes. And there is one public opinion survey which was conducted in autumn 2020 by my colleagues from Belgrade Center for Security Policy. Engjellushe is familiar with this study. So, I mean, about the mood in Serbia. Over 58% of the Serbs believe that their country will never join the EU. 87% of the Serbs believe that China's influence in the country is positive. 40% of them believe that Russia is the greatest friend of the country. 57% believe that Serbia should align its policy with Russia and China. 75% believe that China provided most aid during the pandemic last year. And I would say that the situation does not look good for Europe, in Serbia, and probably in the Balkans, because similar public opinion survey has not been conducted in regards to the vaccine. But I think it is safe to bet that if it does get conducted, the results will not look good. And if this situation carries on, I'm highly skeptical that even traditionally Euro-enthusiastic societies, so far like North Macedonia and Albania, will remain Euro-enthusiastic if the situation carries on. On that pessimistic note, I will conclude.
Okay, thank you, Vuk. I mean, enthusiasm probably comes after pessimism, but this is a philosophical question. Thank you so much for this very, very precise insight into the dynamics of the vaccine politics and focusing so much on Serbia. Let's move to Faruk, and then I will have there are one or two questions in the chat, and there is a question that I would like to ask you. Faruk was recently as the Austrian Marshall Plan Fellow at Johns Hopkins University, and has written a lot on China's influence in the Western Balkans, but even more broadly. Faruk, can you give us a picture from your point of view? I mean, definitely focusing a bit on China, but it might be that you also have one or two sentences to spare on because we haven't done it so intensively on Biden and the possible US strategy that many are expecting and few are fearing a bit in the region. So, Faruk.
Thank you, Vedran, for that generous introduction, and it's a pleasure to be with you and also to join a panel of such distinguished speakers. I do believe that this is a grave moment, not just for the Western Balkan countries, but also for the European Union and also for the transatlantic relations. Let me start by saying that during the Yugoslav war, or during the Yugoslav crisis in 1991, Jacques Post claimed that this is the hour of Europe. And his American counterpart, James Baker, who is well known with his famous remark, who said that United States had no dog in this fight. And we know very well what happened later. So sometimes it's also worth remembering what the former Austrian foreign minister, Alois Mock, during the time said that when he warned, either we do it or the others do it, but they will do it differently. And this is exactly what we have today. The influence of non-Western powers, the impact of non-Western players in the Balkans is much higher, is much bigger than 30 years earlier. And 3 decades of American and European engagement in the Balkans has been marked more by success than by failure. And when the United States and the European Union, work closer together and share the same point of view for the Balkans, one sees hope, progress, and prosperity. And 30 years later, sometimes I do believe that the United States and the European Union are acting with complacency in the crisis and forgetting that the list of challenges is not the same as 30 years earlier. Now, I would say it's more unpredictable. And I do believe that the United States and also European Union firstly have to fill the gap they left in the past decade, like delays to the accession process and the lack of realistic roadmap. And regarding China, I would like also to emphasize that I don't think that is necessarily bad when Chinese companies increase their cooperation with European partners, because we have in some cases win-win cooperation, which means that both parties will win, or in some investments in the Balkans, they have a positive impact, or I mean, increasing bilateral trade could stimulate also the region's economic growth. Or in comparison to Russia, the Chinese officials have publicly expressed China's support to the EU enlargement with the Western Balkans. But the problem with Chinese investments or with the Chinese impact in the region is because China is using its state-owned companies to invest in strategic assets or in key sectors like infrastructure, 5G network, and so on. And China might use its investment to gain political leverage. And the Europeans and also the countries from the Western Balkans have to take note that there is a strategy behind it, and there is not kind of a free market economy in the Western sense. Of course, we can discuss about free market economy in China, but China's free market economy is for unfree people. And I do believe that the Europeans, I mean, not just the EU, but also the Western Balkan countries have to say to the Chinese officials that some key or assets or national sectors are not for sale. And indeed, in the last 40 years, China is one of the most rising economic power in the world, is the second largest economy in the world, is the biggest exporter and also the second largest exporter. It's also a member of UN Security Council. So China is not just a big market where you can sell your products, but also a communist regime which is promoting its authoritarian model. And the Chinese authoritarian model could also have negative consequences for the Balkans, because some local politicians might use the Chinese Communist Party as a model of economic modernization. And just to mention briefly, some local politicians from the Balkans are not seeing China as a challenge, but as a kind of gift of heaven. We have seen billboard in the street of Belgrade dedicated to President Xi, saying, "Thanks, brother Xi, you are the only one to help us." Or when President Vučić kissed the Chinese flag, and this was very funny because we have never seen President Vučić kissing the European flag or billboard saying thanks to the EU for help. And my last point will be that the EU still remains the most or the largest trading partner and investor and also donor, not just for Serbia, but also for the Western Balkans. And if some Western Balkan countries try to create a positive narrative for China and undermining the positive narrative in general sense, then it will have implications for region stability and also for the Euro-Atlantic aspirations.
Thank you so much, Faruk. Now we definitely know who is kissing what, and who has a big and who has a small brother. That's good, but thanks for the assessment, for the overall assessment. So now I'm just looking at our time. It's fascinating. We could go on for hours, but we could probably not, I mean, we will not make it as we all probably have this Zoom fatigue, this kind of a new illness that's spreading rapidly across the policy circles and think tankers. We wait for some Chinese medicine to stop the Zoom fatigue. But to be serious, there are a few questions in the chat. There are questions on the EU, on the possible best practices from the EU. There is a question on the role of the US administration. There is a question on, or there are a few questions on NATO and a few comments. But let me try to make a kind of round, circling and focusing on fairy tales. First of all, someone of you mentioned European solidarity is a fairy tale. I don't know who it was. And secondly, the second part of the question, I mean, the first part of the question will be, is the European solidarity that we so much need today, let's say in Sarajevo or in Zenica or in Belgrade or in Tirana, is this a fairy tale? And what's the role that the EU can play possibly now in the next period to come in this vaccine or pandemic situation that is horrible? And secondly, and just on top of it, is the Biden USA re-engagement also a fairy tale, or what should we and what could we expect? So let's make a kind of a bit quicker round on this one. Faruk already said a bit on something on the USA, on Biden. Faruk, if you, because we are sitting at the same institute, and we should give our guests a bit more time. If you,
yes, please.
If you forgive me, I just jump in a way over you, but we will have a possibility to discuss this one. But I would like just, Faruk mentioned a bit on Biden. Vuk, I would like to ask you on this two-headed fairy tale and your prospects on that one, and then go to Jovana, Engjellushe, and Florian at the end. So Vuk.
No, I mean, I was the one who mentioned European.
I knew it.
But I mean, I quoted Vučić. I didn't say that it was my quote. But I mean, I do have to stress something. I mean, in the end, despite this initial, as I said, short-sighted move to ban the export last year of medical protective devices, the EU has followed through afterwards by donating just during the first wave 93 million euros. And probably if we were to do some additional calculations, it would be a whole lot more money. But I think that the key problem that the EU faces is the way it strategically operates in the Balkans. Because I think that the EU has failed to understand that in places like the Balkans, it's not just how much money you give in at the end of the day. It is not just about the end of the day financial sheet at the end of the day, but I also think it is very important, the issue of timing, when you do it, that you do it in a timely manner. And number two, the way you communicate, not just with the local elites, but also with the local citizenry. I mean, the EU has the right to be angry about the fact that there was no billboard, thank you Europe, like it was regarding Xi Jinping, thank you brother Xi. But at the same time, I also tell to the European counterparts here in Belgrade, well, nothing prevents you from developing your own public diplomacy and marketing strategy. You can't convince me that you don't have the money, that the EU offices in Serbia does not have the money to pay for a Belgrade-based billboard. So, I mean, yes, of course, there is a problem with the local government, a major problem of the local government in Belgrade, but the EU also needs to step up, and it needs to step up heavily. As far as the issue about Biden goes, yes, I do think that the issue that there is a power vacuum, but at this moment in time, how long this power vacuum in the Balkan lasts will be more dependent on the behavior of the US rather than on the behavior of the EU, given how disoriented the EU is at this moment in time. And I think that during the last couple of years, we have seen that the exercise of US might can be a game changer. I mean, the US did a tremendous job of doing a significant rollback of Russian influence in the Balkans by pushing for the resolution of Macedonia, and by removing Zaev government, by pushing for membership of North Macedonia and Montenegro in NATO, and yes, even the resolving the Albanian government crisis a couple of years ago. So it does show that the US, as still the global superpower, unlike more bureaucratic EU, can do things that the EU cannot. And I think that something similar will also happen in regards to China, given that the growing Sino-Chinese rivalry is becoming the dominant trend of the American foreign policy, which will inevitably engulf the Balkans. And yes, we have seen this in case of 5G. After the White House agreement, Serbia is now postponing the 5G tender to avoid this unpleasant choice. However, I also think that there is one major move that the Biden administration needs. The West needs not just pressure and not just sticks, but it also needs carrots. Because if the local capitals like Belgrade give up on China, simply as a result of US pressure, like for example, threatening with financial sanctions, that is fine, but at the end of the day, it won't produce pro-Western sentiment, because everybody's saying they are denying us to cooperate with China while they are not offering us anything in return. So yes, the US should do a strategic pushback against non-Western players, but I also think that they need to provide a viable alternative vis-a-vis projects offered by the Russians and the Chinese if they want to have an effective strategy.
Thanks a lot, Vuk. Let's go to Jovana and see what she thinks about the fairy tales.
I don't believe in fairy tales, first of all, and there's no European solidarity in the Western Balkans. I have to agree with Vuk that there was the EU was the biggest donor in Montenegro during the first wave of pandemic, but now this role is missing, and is also missing from the democratization process, you know. And also I have to agree with him that this whole European integration story and everything is something which is now built just on, you know, like keeping the Western Balkans at the distance. So I don't see that the EU is currently helping, even with the coronavirus crisis or with the democratization of the country. So I guess that there is a question in the chat that what should be the incentives when it comes to the EU policy towards the Western Balkans. We are always somehow we always felt excluded from the European Union and from the whole this story about the European values and part of the European family. And this whole story about the COVID passports and everything, trying to, you know, even to put the Western Balkans, you know, somehow more obstacles to travel in the EU and everything. So I guess that the incentives should be to include the Western Balkans more, their citizens, but also the countries in some of the EU policies, and at least to provide this model of incentives and sanctions in order to have for countries to have clear goals on annual basis, and if we are fulfilling them, you know, just to progress in the EU integration process.
Thanks, Jovana. Let's fly to Berlin. Engjellushe.
Yes, thanks, Vedran. I'm going to disappoint you. I don't think EU solidarity is a fairy tale. Of course, I mean, there's quite a lot to be done there, and EU definitely could have done much, much better. But I think EU is not only the EU is not the only unit. I just want to say that other individual European countries have also helped Western Balkan countries during this period. And if I could just link it with external powers. So in the Western Balkans, external powers were always present. And there are other external powers that we haven't mentioned today that are playing quite a negative role nowadays in some of these countries. And so they were always there. They were always playing different roles, not always positive. The pandemics was just another entry point for, in this case, for China and Russia to show their you know, diplomatic skills in these different ways. This is not going to last forever. Of course, the pandemics is going to go away at one point, and we will be left with the same issues of external powers being present. But none of these external powers have the alternative that EU integration process has offered to the countries. And I think let's not forget and be fair that there is a lot of restructuring that has happened in these countries. There are NATO members in the Balkans. The EU accession is not, you know, is not equal to zero in many ways. So I want to say that, you know, it's really not a fairy tale, but there is a lot that needs to be done, of course. And I hope with the Biden administration, this will change, because in many ways, there was also a very strange administration in place that has confused Europe in the last few years. And has confused the Western Balkans with their policy approaches. There were definitely, as Vuk mentioned, there were some very positive influences, especially with the North Macedonia. But in many ways, the interest of the EU administration was not there. And when it was there, it was transactional. So everyone is hoping now that this will change. And everyone is also hoping that this will not be Obama style of US involvement in the Balkans when we didn't see enough leadership. But the Western Balkans have also, we need to show, the Western Balkans as a region needs to show that, first of all, there is solidarity within the region. We shouldn't always expect that EU shows solidarity, but we don't show enough solidarity, or the six don't show enough solidarity with one another. And also, Western Balkans need to show that it has some kind of an idea how to push for more US-EU involvement in the region, because as we have seen, US is quite interested in another, to focus in another region, so they can very easily just move away from Western Balkans and focus, you know, in places like Indo-Pacific and China and Japan and Korea. The first trip that high-ranking US officials took is to another region. It's not, the Western Balkans is not a priority anymore. So, but we need to show it that or the region has to come up with a proposal how to attract more US and EU involvement, especially after the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Engjellushe. I'm just looking into the chat. I mean, there are interesting comments on the role of the European Union. A colleague of ours, Günther Rosenic, is claiming in the long run, facts and figures will speak for the West. I mean, you just mentioned this, I mean, various levels of solidarity and support. It's not only the EU, it's individual states, et cetera, and certainly the Western Balkans are not going to be moved by the Martians to China or to Russia. So that's definitely not going to happen. And as we see the statistic, the young people are still going to the West. And not to Russia and to China to seek jobs. But this is a kind of a whole other issue. There is an issue, a question on Albania, but that's going to be a little bit too much. But let's go to following up on this question or on this comment. In the long run, facts and figures will speak for the West. Florian, your take on US Biden and Europe, and are the facts and figures really I mean, now in the short run, going to speak for the West, or are we going to see some major geopolitical shifts going on?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, you know, I would not expect the big shift from the Biden administration. I mean, I think it's important. I mean, it's important because you will have a more coherent, similar message coming from the US and the EU, and that's already going to help the EU in a long way. But I think it's going to be a lot, you know, the lot in the way it was under the Obama administration. I don't expect it to be fundamentally different. I don't see why the US will focus or, you know, towards the Western Balkans, especially considering post-pandemic. It will have lots of other issues to deal with, and the plate continues to be full. I mean, the priorities are not dictated by a whim, but certainly by some real strategic concerns of the US, and as long as there isn't a need, it will not shift to the Western Balkans. So if it shifts there, then it's more assigned to worry even more. Now, I think, you know, of course, the point about, you know, the Western Balkans will remain in Europe and they will remain surrounded by the European Union. All of this, the realities of that will not change. So in that sense, of course, that's the basic underlying structural optimism one can have, is that, you know, the external actors will only have a, you know, China and Russia's engagement is fleeting potentially, and is certainly not in the same way as the European Union's interlocking with the Western Balkans. That's not going to go away. But, you know, the region has been outside of the EU for, you know, for 20 years now, and so it can remain outside of the EU for another 20 years. It's not going to move to China, but it can still be outside, and that's no good. It can still mean that Kosovo citizens can't travel freely to the European Union. It still can mean that thousands leave every year. So I don't worry about a different reality, but I worry about the continuation of the current reality. And so I think there's 2 points. I mean, I think, first of all, I do believe in European solidarity. It exists, of course. It existed in the European Union and towards the Western Balkans. It's just very hard to have solidarity in these moments. It's also important, of course, it's not solidarity of the EU, but of member states. The EU as an institution cannot decide about vaccines. It's member states, Austria, who can say, we will give Bosnia 10,000 vaccines, or it's Croatia which can say it, or Germany, or whatever else. It's not the EU which can say it. So I think we have to be clear about whom we're expecting to act with solidarity. It's, you know, it's German hospitals which took French patients in the hardest moments. So this is where individual countries can act. And, you know, they're not acting with enough solidarity, but because in Austria, I don't want to be the politician who says, we're going to send 50,000 vaccines from Austria now to Bosnia. I mean, it should be done. I would advocate it, but that requires a certain degree of kind of future-oriented politics, which is very rare at the moment in the European Union. So I think it's tricky and difficult to sell. And, you know, it comes back to some degree what our friend Nikola Dimitrov has said often, you know, it's cold outside the European Union. And what he was saying to the UK friends, you know, it's hard, you know, it's not easy to be outside of a bloc. It's hard inside, but it's certainly not easier outside. And I think we're seeing this in many cases now. But so I think in that sense, maybe to the kind of positive note, I would take what is the kind of revealing with the pandemic, all the crisis it revealed of enlargement of state capacity. I mean, all of this is maybe a good thing in the sense that these are weaknesses we all talked about in different ways, not as strongly before the crisis. And this, in a certain way, revealing it also helps to deal with it, because I think enlargement was not better a year and a half ago. I don't think the state of public administration was better a year and a half ago, but now it's clear and to a lot more people, and maybe that triggers some kind of more profound discussion and also change. So in that sense, some good can come out of any crisis, and with all the pain and the difficulties it entails, that could be maybe the one, you know, encouraging side of the story.
Thanks a lot, Florian. I mean, I will just move my laptop to show you this picture here. This is a very famous one by Safet Zec, a Bosnian painter, having this man, a Bosnian old man, standing ahead of the wall, and basically being totally lost. I mean, to a certain degree, some parts of our today's conversation were a bit slightly depressing, but I believe that was a very realistic and sober assessment of what we have ongoing in the Western Balkans. But based on this assessment, and you all outlined like few possible avenues for action. And when we go back to this famous saying that I like so much by Hannah Arendt, the new always appears in the guise of a miracle. I do believe we need some miracle, but we have to shape this miracle. I mean, there is a lot of hard work to be put in both European solidarity, new transatlantic approach, rethink, re-energize enlargement if this is ever going to be possible again. We need courageous politics, probably even some steps ahead. I mean, Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz is not here, but he could fly to Skopje again and deliver a few of the AstraZeneca vaccines that some people in Austria don't want to take. That will be a courageous step. So there is a miracle that we need to work on. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your questions in the Q&A. That was a short but a very vivid, interesting debate on the Western Balkans and the post-COVID Western Balkans. There will be a video on the YouTube channel of the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. Thank you guys. Thanks Vuk to Belgrade. Thanks Faruk to the 4th district, if I'm not mistaken. Florian to Graz. Jovana to Kotta. Best greetings to the Adriatic Sea that we miss so much. Engjellushe, we also miss Berlin, but also Pristina. Thank you all for participating. Thanks also to the Austrian Marshall Plan Foundation, ECFR, and Austrian Ministry of Defense. Thank you all. And now we are free of Zoom, at least for the next few hours, probably. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Vedran.
Bye.
Thanks.